Well, this is a very curious review, I think very bad, but it did illuminate certain aspects of two fandoms, and I'm just going to deal with those fandoms primarily, although others will be pulled in, namely the Tolkien fandom, which is also the Peter Jackson fandom to some degree, whether I like it or not, and the Joss Whedon fandom. So let's deal with Tolkien and Jackson first, and a perhaps very flawed attempt to follow up Lord of the Rings, and yes, of all places, Ant-Man 3.
It's also a shame that the creators of this mess hate him so much, when had they taken this a little more seriously, they could have told a meaningful story.
I love Lord of the Rings more than anything, and that Sean Bean death, where he's like just so stoic and it's so emotional, Viggo Mortensen. The idea of like, what if we did that, but with a guy who really didn't deserve it, and who was really milking their sympathy the whole time.
So yes, apparently the MODOK scene is modeled on Aragorn and what happens with Lord of the Rings, the film. Right, I want to stress, I don't think he's applying the book, and this is definitely not what Tolkien wanted. He did not want an action-filled spectacle. So it may be brutal, but I think Christopher Tolkien is right that the books were dumbed down to be action films. You can say they're great action films, but that's not the intention of the books. And what's ironic is the person is trying to say, well, this makes Ant-Man 3 way worse, but actually makes it a lot better. It seems that they had really big ambitions for Ant-Man 3. I don't think they succeeded, but it does show that death scene is way more complex. They're doing something way more ambitious than just showing, villain is dying, and it's kind of be a little comedic and silly. So you can love or hate Ant-Man 3, but a lot more is going on than you might suspect. Now let's turn to Joss Whedon, because you can say what is wrong with a film, and apparently his standard is internal consistency. So he's saying the MCU is declining because it's moving away from that standard, and once upon a time it had that standard, a la Joss Whedon. And he uses Avengers 1 as a test case, but that's not going to make sense, as we're going to see.
It could smell crazy on him.
Loki is beyond reason, but he is of Asgard, and he is my brother.
He killed 80 people in 2 days.
He's adopted.
I don't think I need to keep explaining why these jokes are funny, especially not when we're covering some of the best of the entire MCU.
Your ship is filthy.
Now, I think most normal people would take that Thor joke as it's intended, namely that well, is Loki Asgardian or not? He's not Asgardian, so Thor was lying. But we realized, well, he wasn't exactly lying, he was just being a little coy. It's just a silly scene, you don't want to take it too seriously. But again, if you're going to take internal consistency as an absolute standard, well then, that's a bad scene, it's a bad movie, it's a bad story. Joss Whedon is one of the worst screenwriters of all time, one of the worst directors of all time. I think that's a really harsh and stupid judgment, but that is what you would be forced into if you apply internal consistency to the point of insanity, which this person does. The problem is there's no consistency with that standard, because you're saying Ant-Man 3 is really bad, but Avengers 1 is really good. But from the standard of internal consistency, no, both have really, really big plot holes. To me, it seems Joss Whedon is borrowing from two traditions, the genre tradition, as well as this more artistic modernist tradition, as embodied with David Lynch and Stanley Kubrick and others, and now Christopher Nolan. I think someone like Zack Snyder is right in the middle. But if you have to make a choice, I do think Joss is more on the genre side. That doesn't make him any less artistic, but that's where his allegiance is, and Buffy and Angel definitely show that. If I did have to rank these things, I'd go Angel, Buffy first, Age of Ultron in the middle, and then Avengers on the bottom. Because again, a lot of Avengers is just laying down foundations, establishing environment, and yes, spending time on really bad, lame jokes because you want to set up who the characters are. But that means the actual story is very thin, and it does have a lot of plot holes. Again, I still think Avengers is a pretty good movie, but I do think it's overrated. However, I wouldn't say it's just bad because of internal inconsistencies. That's definitely a major dilemma. But I think the problem is it was just too rushed. He's just trying to do too much what he did with Buffy and Angel, is give us this family with these weird dynamics going back and forth, but he had to do things so fast that a lot is being lost, which I think Age of Ultron provided a lot more balance.